The road to learning ASL.
When we first found out that he was hard of hearing, because
we are a spoken language family, so we had no exposure to the deaf and hard of hearing community.
Hello and welcome. My name is Karen Hopkins, and I am the Executive Director of the Maine Educational Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I would love to invite you to journey with us through the process of exploring the various language and communication opportunities available to you and your family. Growing up in northern Maine, the only deaf child in my family, my parents struggled to find the information, resources, and support available to them to be able to make informed decisions for my language development and educational opportunities. I also never had the opportunity to meet other deaf and hard of hearing people until I was in high school. This was much too late. Deaf and hard of hearing children need to meet other deaf and hard of hearing children and adults. As a college student at Gallaudet University, I had the amazing opportunity to learn ASL, American Sign Language, and realize my identity as a deaf person. In my everyday life now, I communicate both in ASL and spoken language.
My vision is that all families have access to other parents with deaf and hard of hearing children, that all families and deaf and hard of hearing children have access to deaf and hard of hearing peers and adults, that all families have informed information to make decisions for their families. Please know that this is truly a journey. We are honored to walk alongside you. Your early interventionist will guide you through these next months as you learn. They'll offer different experiences for you to be involved, and we encourage you to ask questions, to have conversations, and to meet as many people as you can through this process. We look forward to this journey, to your family's journey, and we are excited to see what the future brings for you and your child. Thank you.
The Exploring Language and Communication Opportunities, or ELCO process, was developed to ensure your family receives all of the information necessary to begin your journey of developing a strong language foundation for your child. As we know, children need language to learn. Language, whether visual or spoken, is the necessary element in developing the critical life skills of communication, social skills, thinking skills, literacy, and knowledge base. While the Continuum overview provides general information about visual, spoken, and combined approaches, the WEBs guide professionals to include more specific information about the elements needed for each approach to reach its fullest potential. The ultimate goal of the ELCO process is to allow your family to make evidence-informed decisions and devise an initial language and communication plan. This plan will allow the team to put the appropriate supports in place for each unique family language and communication plan. They will be reviewed frequently, at least every 6 months to a year, to determine what's working, what's not working, and consequently, if changes need to be made in their original plan. The WEBs can act as a framework to families and providers in determining which elements may be missing and what changes need to be made. This is a journey. Plans are made, families and children grow, and the team reflects on growth and decides how this approach is working and what might need to be added or changed to best match family and children's needs. No language and communication plan is final. It is a fluid document to ensure families' goals are clear and services are in place to support those goals. In this video, we'll use the ELCO WEBs as a guide for early intervention specialists to share information about each language and communication approach. Although some are specialists in one area or another, each provider is presenting their approach without bias, giving concrete information and resources for families to explore, allowing for true evidence-informed decision-making that matches a family's values and goals.
American Sign Language, ASL. ASL is a visual language that was developed naturally in the deaf community and was officially recognized as a language in the 1960s. ASL has its own unique grammatical structure. ASL acquisition is visual in American Sign Language. Language expression is on the hands, on the face, and by using body movements. You may wonder why a family would want to communicate with their child using American Sign Language. Families whose children who do not have access to spoken language through audition, but do have visual or tactile access, may choose ASL. Families who want their children to have full access to information using a visual language and the deaf community. Families who want their children to have the ability to choose later on in life, such as taking classes or socializing or attending events in either language. They may also choose ASL. You may be wondering how a family learns American Sign Language. They can take a family ASL class, ASL family training. A teacher of the deaf who's fluent in ASL can teach, iPad apps, community classes, and an additional option would be online learning. Research has shown that the involvement of a culturally deaf individual in your journey when learning American Sign Language can improve the outcome significantly for most families. Your competence in American Sign Language vocabulary and grammar will impact your child's success as they're learning American Sign Language. It's important that you use American Sign Language consistently throughout your daily routines. The consistent involvement of an ASL family trainer or a deaf mentor, or both, provides the resources necessary to comprehensively attain true language use and proficiency in American Sign Language development. A native speaker of American Sign Language is going to provide more nuances of appropriate language use than a fluent second language user. Children who communicate using American Sign Language may use an ASL interpreter when they're in the classroom.
We found out she was deaf about 2 weeks old, and about 6 weeks old, Kristen Shorey came to the house, and she started guiding us through what we could do, and we decided to choose ASL. We knew our daughter, the inside of her ears, her cochlears didn't form, she had Mondini syndrome, so we didn't know how bad it was. That we started with hearing aids, and we did that for about 2 months, and those didn't work. And then they were going to do a cochlear, which we decided that we would try. If she was a candidate for, we'd try it.
Turned out that she wasn't a candidate, so we went ASL all the way.
She's profound deaf, she can't hear anything. And with the way her inner ear grew, her hearing nerves and her balance nerves all grew together. So yeah, that's all she's ever going to have is ASL. I mean, she could choose to learn other languages when she's older. If she wanted to learn cued speech, we'll definitely be behind her.
I think it's more like close family, like us as parents. It was easier for us to decide, and it was always an issue with around our family. So like, I mean, our parents and are like, well, she'll learn how to read subtitles or stuff. So in their mentality, they're always like waiting for that. And instead we have to educate them that it's not going to be just on her part. You have to play your role too. So it's taken time.
Yeah, to convince both of our families. So some of them would think that we would interpret for them so they wouldn't have to learn ASL. That was always a hard thing because it was an inconvenience, I think, a little bit for them, which is sad to say that, but I think for some people it was. And then we kind of told them, hey, we're not always going to be around. So she's going to need to be able to talk to you guys. It's a good thing. You don't have, you just start learning slowly. I'm catching on now. I learned it's kind of cool. A lot of the sign language and a lot of the signs kind of represent the image you're talking about, like trees. So I kind of caught on. It helped a lot. So I'm a visual learner. I have to put a picture with something, so it helped a lot. And for her, she could catch on just where she's learned multiple languages. It was really easy for her.
We always had something to educate us more and more. It's not something that you learn overnight. No. So I mean, we went through events. We went to a camp. We went to Camp Discover. We put ourselves out there to make sure that we were informed, to make sure we're doing the best we can for our daughter.
She did her first 5 sign sentences this week. So
I mean, she's learning.
I was happy. It made me a little emotional. Because
So
I wasn't sure. I didn't know if where she'd be at now. I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to give her what she needed.
But I mean, it's classes after classes, and it's practicing every day. You're not going to remember the signs like taking 1 hour class and then being, okay, I got everything, I'm done.
Yeah.
No, you have to practice it. So we started with simple words like milk, and we would talk and be like, oh, I need the milk over there, and the baby needs to change diapers, but you have to implement it into your routine. If not, you're not going to remember the signs.
I feel like if you aren't constantly using it, it's easy to forget. Bella loves it. She's a little sassy now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. She's learning all these new words, and she doesn't want to hear what you're talking about. Close her eyes.
Her teachers.
Yeah, I feel bad for her teachers. But she has a lot of attitude. She knows what she wants, and she's signing every day now. Every day signing it. Everything she's doing.
That is her way of communicating. So I mean, she gets to tell us what she wants now.
When she started school, it's definitely heightened everything a lot. It's helped. Now
we're still in the toddler age.
Yeah.
we're in the toddler. We have not passed her. I don't think we will.
She's going to stay ahead of us. I mean, you can try all you want, but where that's her only language and she's around kids all day, I think she's just we're going to have to try to keep up with her now at this point. Before it was us trying to teach her, and now she's learning more, so I think she's going to take off with it, and we're just going to do what we can to keep learning. And I'm not going to give up. We'll keep learning.
I am a CODA, so a child of deaf adults. I grew up in a deaf family. I am actually the only one in my family that has full hearing. I also am a mom of a profoundly deaf child. Her dad is also deaf, so ASL has been in our household from her day one. And when we found out she was deaf, we did kind of go over the options, which there's cochlear implant, there is hearing aids, which won't give her speech or language. It would be more for background noise, and a little bit of deaf etiquette too, to be aware that, hey, slamming the toilet lid makes a noise in the cupboards. But we chose ASL, and she did have hearing aids in kindergarten. They overwhelmed her because the level that she needed to even hear anything was so extreme. It was giving her headaches, things like that. So we, listened to that. And ASL has, where it's been in our family, it's something we've known, and it's something she's had access to from the very beginning. There was a little bit of a time frame where she knew what she wanted to say, but she couldn't put the words to it because she hadn't quite learned the words that she needed yet, the signs that she needed. But full conversations, she is a little chatterbox. She'll talk your ear off. And my nephews also know sign language, and she has full access to family. The cochlear implant wasn't quite something that we were really going to look down that path. If it's something she wants to talk about later on in life, that's something we'll bring up then, but she's got her language. Nobody else in our family has an implant. And I didn't want her to feel that we chose that destiny for her without talking to her about it. and for her to kind of come back and say, well, how come Daddy doesn't have one, Papa, her cousins, because we don't feel like there's anything to fix, if that makes sense. We feel like she could be very successful still. Having a deaf child, there's no access really in daycares and babysitters unless we have family that know sign language doing it. So my mom, my mother-in-law, they've been, since day one, are huge support for Haley. They also have been huge in supporting her learning sign language too, because she's having that constant access.
I want to tell you a little bit about one of the communication modes that you may be able to explore with your family, which is manually coded English. Manually coded English is a communication mode that actually provides both visual and auditory access to the English language. It is important to identify that English word order is honored in manually coded English, but the spoken language is supported with visual signs. There's actually a number of different systems that might be considered to be manually coded English, and those systems will vary on the kinds of signs that might be utilized in support of speech and or the additional supports within the signs that would identify more specific information associated with English grammatical structure. What is different about the systems specifically looks at the kinds of signs that might be used and how much English information might be presented using those additional sign supports. A family may choose manually coded English or one of the systems of manually coded English if they would like to be able to have their child have access to both the auditory information from spoken English and also additional visual supports through signs. A family may also be very interested in manually coded English in order to be able to kind of utilize or teach their child a communication mode that utilizes the language that they might be most comfortable with. If they're hearing parents, for example, English is their first language, so manually coded English is a mode that can be comfortable for choice with people because they already know English. So manually coded English can be learned by families in a variety of different ways. It is important for families to be able to learn from communicators who naturally use this code or this communication mode. There are also a number of professionals with specific skills in teaching using the manually coded systems, and a family may benefit from interactions with these professionals as well. Speech-language pathologists can also be trained in utilizing manually coded English and can provide a level of support to families who end up choosing this communication mode. When a family chooses manually coded English as the communication mode for their child, it's important to remember that that family will need a level of support from a variety of different individuals within the community. Being able to meet and interact with deaf mentors and deaf guides who utilize this particular communication mode is exceptionally helpful to families and to the children alike. Also being able to meet and communicate with other families who are choosing this mode. Another component of manually coded English that is important to incorporate is the use of hearing assistive technology. For families who choose manually coded English, many of the children have access to some of the spoken language, so maximizing that auditory access while also supplementing it with visual supports is extremely important.
He has degenerative hearing loss, but we didn't know it definitively until he was about 2. In fact, initially, we didn't know he had any hearing loss at all. We were skeptical, and that belief was sort of perpetuated by his caregivers when he was doing his initial hearing tests.
So around 2 years old,
Yes.
he had a sedated hearing test performed, and it was determined that he had the degenerative hearing loss. At the time, it was only...
It was moderate in his left and normal in his right.
Correct. And we recently just found out that it's moderate to severe in his right and severe in his left. So it is, it is decreasing very rapidly at this point. We decided to go with a sign-supported speech approach to supplement spoken language, with spoken language still being the end goal. Also at the time, we didn't know that he had childhood apraxia of speech. So we've been told that people can understand about 5% of what it is he's trying to say. So having sign language as basically, I would say, his primary language.
To be understood by others, yes.
Has been crucial.
It's really his most useful communication tool. It's his speech with other people right now, especially outside of the family. And we started to learn sign language ourselves and started to implement that in our daily routines and our life. And initially his uptake was a little slow, but recently, it's really since the age of 3, it's exploded. And he loves learning now.
He does. He gets so excited when someone signs to him, and he can talk with his peers if he's around them using sign, and he can speak with us. It's really alleviated a lot of frustrations that I think everyone experienced, him and ourselves in communicating, and it's really been a great avenue to build a relationship with our son that we weren't really able to at first. Around the same time of his hearing diagnosis, we were also told that he has autism. So that adds another layer of difficulty for communicating and engaging and interacting with people.
We're currently using sign-supported speech, but we are exploring the opportunity to get into bimodal bilingual because we're anticipating he'll have continued hearing loss. And we want to be well positioned if that happens, both as a family and for him.
We meet with a teacher of the deaf every week, and we spend an hour with her learning about, learning sign language, learning about deaf culture, learning about any of the hearing devices that he's using. Currently, he's using a bone-anchored hearing aid. That will now change because of his latest hearing test results. But we just try and get as much as we can out of every session.
And we explore on our own as well, independently. And we use sign language even when Evan's not around between the two of us, because we really have incorporated it into our lives. It's become a part of our lives.
It has, yes. Once you incorporate it in your lives and you learn it and you just utilize it every day and you're consistent, it becomes, second nature to just communicate in that way. And that's been, I think, key to the whole process and to teaching him.
And the fun element of it is really critical as well. I mean, we enjoy doing this. We've had a great time with Kathy. She's just such a wonderful teacher in person, and we've made sure that Evan has enjoyed his experience. It's very much our nature to be like, we're going to learn sign language and we're going to do it 8 hours a day, and we're going to start now. And we've resisted that temptation, and it's made the experience better, I think, for everybody.
I think given sign-supported speech is most definitely easier than some of the other methods that some people need to use, but it's a process, and everyone learns differently. I mean, even through the two of us, he learns better in some ways than I do, as far as retaining all of the information. But it's really, we've learned that it's a process, and it's going to take time.
I don't think it's any more difficult than any other language. It's just different, and that difference does make it interesting. It's not like learning French, so that is an interesting element. And it is visually beautiful. A really eloquent speaker moves her hands in a very beautiful way, And that's very elegant and interesting.
It has changed our relationship with him and with each other as a family. And moving forward, obviously, being able to sit here and have a conversation like you and I are having right now would be, wonderful. That's what you think of. But with that not looking like a possibility for him for many, as we said, there's multiple reasons for that. We just, moving forward, want him to find ways to communicate, to still be the silly, happy little boy that he is, and enjoy life and be a good person.
We have 2 boys. Benjamin is 5 years old and Lucas is 2. Lucas is the one with hearing aids. He has bilateral hearing loss. The doctors say that it's classified as moderate to severe.
Yep.
He's had hearing aids since he was 1 year old, roughly. So he's been wearing hearing aids for about a year. As far as a little bit of history in our family, my parents are both fully deaf. I grew up in a deaf household, signing and speaking at the same time. My brother and sister are both hearing, so 3 hearing kids with 2 deaf parents. There was a lot of sign language and speech in my household.
So we decided to go with kind of a manually coded English approach with Lucas because we have Jason's sign language experience. He's completely fluent in sign, so it made sense for us to take the approach of signing and speaking at the same time, so he had access to multiple forms of communication. We were already doing that with our older son so that he could speak with his grandparents through sign when we see them. So for us, we were kind of just naturally doing that approach. So for us, it was easy to already implement something that we knew. I don't have as much access with sign language, so I'm kind of learning sign as we go. I know single words and we kind of put them together for Lucas, so I'm learning just alongside of him. But it made the most sense for us to take that approach because we already had the resources that we needed to implement 2 forms of communication.
Yeah, we were big advocates for signing as babies, so it was more of an extension of that into what we do now. We've always been speaking and signing and integrating both at the same time, so doing that with Lucas is pretty natural to us.
Yeah, he has hearing aids that he's used for a year now. The beginning was rather difficult to get him to keep his hearing aids in. As a 1-year-old, it's really, really hard to get them to keep them in all the time. You try every technique you can to make sure they stay in as long as possible during the day. I think back then we were getting really frustrated early on trying to keep the hearing aids in, and you look back now and it's just part of our day-to-day. He wakes up and he puts them in before we get changed for the day and get dressed and out of our pajamas, and then at the end of the night he takes them out after we do bedtime stories and he goes to bed. So before that it was 10, 20, 30 times a day they were coming in and out, and it can be really frustrating, and it was a struggle that we had to overcome for a while, but the hearing aids are definitely making a significant difference in his hearing. His speech is changing, which is amazing to see at this point.
At first, when we were initially using his hearing aids, we were a little bit skeptical because we thought that he could hear more than the doctors were telling us. He would respond when we would ask him questions, and he would hear noises that we didn't think he should be able to hear. So hearing aids weren't as much of a priority at first. We didn't think that necessarily he needed them as much as the folks told us that he did. But since we've been much more diligent about him wearing them, and since he's become accustomed to wearing them all day, we've seen his speech kind of blow up, using 2 and 3 and 4 word sentences, and his words are becoming more clear since he's been wearing the hearing aids. His vowels and consonants are much more distinguishable. We didn't think that he needed them, but it's clear that he obviously did. And his speech is one of the first things that we noticed that with.
Yeah, I would say some of his words that are developing over time now. So there are things that he used to pronounce that we would understand what he was saying, but any person on the street, kind of like any other toddler, you just wouldn't be able to know unless it was a parent or someone that was around them all the time. But now there are words that are evolving and changing, and the only reason is because he's wearing the hearing aids. If he wasn't wearing them as regularly as he is now and as he should be, then I don't think his speech would be developing as much as it is. I think we use sign a lot of times when he can't communicate, if there's words that he just can't say, and try as he may, if he thinks that we're understanding what he's saying, we just can't. So there are times where he gravitates towards sign to really communicate something in a moment of frustration. So that support for himself to be able to communicate with us in a time that he just can't get the words out has been a blessing as well, because at the end of the day, we kind of put the words and the signs together to help us get the message across to each other.
We kind of let him drive it because he picks up certain words quicker than he does on the signs, and vice versa. You know, he might sign something more than he says the word. Grammy is an example where he'll sign it and not say the word at all vocally. So we kind of pick that up, and we recognize which words he prefers to sign and which words he prefers to speak, and try to expand upon that. We try to work on making sure that he knows how to sign and speak the other word as well. You know, if he always signs the word orange, we want to make sure that he can say the word orange as well. But at first, I'm just grateful that he knows how to communicate that word to begin with. Having access to both languages is really reassuring that regardless of whether it's spoken or sign, he can still communicate. And if we need to work on picking the other one up or balancing those scales a little bit, then I can do that later, and just be grateful to know that he can still communicate right now.
Today, I'm going to talk to you about one way to communicate with your deaf or hard of hearing child, called Bilingual Bimodal. It's just one way among many options that your family can explore along your journey. Bilingual Bimodal, also sometimes called Bye-Bye, is actually a combination of two other opportunities. Bilingual means two languages, spoken language and American Sign Language. Bimodal means two modalities, one auditory, listening and spoken language, and one visual, American Sign Language. This approach is based on the fact that children's brains have the ability to acquire both a spoken language and a visual language at the same time without any negative effects. Children's brains are amazing, and we know that being bilingual is an amazing gift to give a child. So, with bilingual bimodal families, they choose both listening and spoken language and American Sign Language to help their child become bilingual and give them the ability to use the language that works best for them depending on the situation. Families who choose bilingual bimodal do so because they want to provide full access to language visually for their child, while they also develop auditory and spoken language skills over time, using their hearing aids or cochlear implants. So no matter what hearing level their child has over time, for example, some children have a progressive loss, or how well their hearing technology is working, if they run out of battery power or lose it, they'll always have access to a full language. The most important piece of this communication opportunity and what makes it unique is the separation of the two languages. And that's what makes it different from manually coded English systems where you talk and sign at the same time. The reason we don't talk and sign at the same time with Bye-Bye is that American Sign Language, also called ASL, is a complete language with its own grammar and structure, just like any foreign language. And that grammar is different than English. For example, in English, we say the red ball, but in French, Spanish, and ASL, the order is actually reversed. Le ballon rouge in French, la pelota roja in Spanish, ball red in ASL. So speaking and signing ASL at the same time isn't possible any more than you can speak English and Spanish at the same time. Now you're probably wondering, how do you go about teaching a child two languages? Well, the good news is that families around the world raise bilingual children successfully every single day. Families that choose bilingual bimodal teach their children the two languages of spoken English and ASL several different ways. One way is called sandwiching. That means you say it first and then sign it second. This gives your child the opportunity to listen and practice understanding spoken language using their hearing assistive technology, and then see it in ASL and get full visual access to the meaning. For example, a mom might say, "Where is the ball?" and then sign. Another way families do this is by choosing different times of day or activities to communicate in a specific language. For example, many families remove their child's hearing assistive technology for bath time, and so they use ASL to communicate with their child during that activity. They might also select a specific meal to be a time for spoken language, and another meal to be a time for ASL. Some families read a story at bedtime in spoken English one night, and then read it again in ASL the next night. Stores and restaurants can be loud and confusing, so those are wonderful opportunities to practice ASL, and so on. Every family does it a little bit differently. Another way families do this is by having one parent consistently use one language while the other parent uses a different language with their child. This is similar to what happens in households worldwide, where one parent knows a foreign language and wants their child to grow up bilingual. Most families use a combination of these over time to give their child access to both languages as they learn and grow. If you choose Bye-Bye, there will be a lot of opportunities to practice and learn what works best for you and your family. Families choose the bilingual bimodal communication opportunity for many reasons. One of the first reasons is that the ultimate goal of bilingual bimodal is to give the child visual and auditory access to 2 full languages so that they become fully bilingual and can access both languages fluently depending on what works best for them. Another reason families like to choose bilingual bimodal are families who would like their child to be able to fully participate in both the deaf community and the hearing community. Also, families who choose this communication opportunity want their child to have the ability to choose later in life to socialize, attend events, or take courses in either language. For example, a college student who's deaf or hard of hearing might be comfortable accessing a small seminar class with 8 to 10 students in spoken English, but might prefer to use an ASL interpreter in a large lecture amphitheater setting with difficult acoustics and hundreds of other students. So families who choose bilingual bimodal benefit from many different types of supports and resources. Some of these would be a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing who specializes in both spoken language and American Sign Language. An American Sign Language family trainer, that's somebody who's going to come into your home and teaches you sign language at your own pace. A speech and language pathologist who specializes in working with deaf and hard of hearing children. Another support that families benefit from is having access and meeting with culturally deaf role models who sign, as well as deaf or hard of hearing role models who speak. And finally, but not least, parent-to-parent support is always crucial, ideally from other families who've also chosen either bilingual bimodal, or perhaps from families who have chosen either American Sign Language or listening and spoken language, as the bilingual bimodal modality incorporates both of these. I hope this gives you a clear overview of bilingual bimodal and why families might choose this communication opportunity. I wish you the very best on your family's journey.
Emma was born pretty clearly with no external ear, so it was pretty obvious from the start that we were going to have some challenges with her hearing. And we found out very early on that she did have an internal working of her inner ear, and so we were able to use the bone conducting aids. And so around 3 to 4 months, she was able to get her hearing aids on, and it was a pretty phenomenal experience to see her hear sound for the first time. Never forget that moment in my life. And we pretty much from the start knew that we wanted to do a bilingual bimodal approach, which basically means using both spoken language and ASL. we're from a hearing family and we have always used spoken language, and Emma is really our first exposure to the deaf and hard of hearing community, other than some work that I've done in the past. And so we did a lot of research and talked with a lot of providers to determine what was the best course of action. And it was kind of to embrace both the deaf culture and the hearing culture and try to expose Emma to both of those as much as we could. Her receptive language is much higher with the ASL, but her expressive language is almost non-existent. So what the decision we made around that was to send her to Mackworth Island preschool, and we just did that this fall. She actually will turn 3, like he said, in 10 days. And so she has been doing some transition time and will start 5 days a week after Thanksgiving break. And she already is coming home using different signs. So we basically, they're amazing here. We really wanted to allow Emma to make the choice herself. And I think that that was the biggest struggle for us, was not knowing and not wanting to say, Emma, this is what you have to do. We wanted to say, here are your options. We'll learn them with you, and when you decide what you want, we are going to support that. The biggest challenge for Emma in terms of the hearing piece, and well, there's a lot of challenges, is that the Bajas cannot get wet in any capacity or they won't work, and they're very expensive. So the beach, the pool, bath time, bedtime, wake up time, can be very challenging. It's not anymore, although sometimes we think she uses that to her advantage, because she will get out of bed and not know that she's not supposed to be doing that.
Who wouldn't like to turn their ears off every once in a while?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
So we have found that that's a really positive way for her to use some sign during those times around the pool and still be able to communicate.
We want Emma to have exposure to both modes of language. Because as she gets older, she may choose that she wants to immerse herself in the deaf culture. And we want to support her if that's her decision. We don't want to make a definitive decision one way or another for our 3-year-old. That could impact her life in long term. So for us, it was that we are a spoken language home. That's from day one when we brought Emma home from the hospital. That was what she had the most exposure to. And so the reason why we were such an advocate to get her fitted for her bone-anchored hearing aids at such a young age was to get her exposure to not only her mom and dad's sound of their voice, but also just the ability for speech development. Because it's so crucial from 0 to 3 years old to have that if you are going to be in a spoken language environment, which primarily if she's with us, her older brother, because he is a typical, hearing 5-year-old that runs around, has high energy, and so she is playing kind of copycat, just like any younger sibling would, and so she really does speak very well. There are certain syllables and things like that, pronunciations that she has struggles with, but we've worked with her. We've had our team, our resources here at the island, and also when she was a baby, really help with that development. And then, as we had said, there's plenty of scenarios. We have a pool, so in the summertime, she is quite a bit time around the pool where she's unaided, where she's profoundly deaf. And so we utilize ASL and gestures to communicate with her to make sure that she's safe. And around water, around bath time, same thing, bedtime, because these devices give quite a bit of feedback if you kind of touch them, just like a microphone would. So there's time where she has to be unaided, and we definitely rely on gesturing and ASL. And hopefully as we get better and more proficient, that becomes a significant part of Emma's life and the people that surround her.
We had a lot of supports along the way through her IFSP team with a speech and language pathologist from Hear Me Now, and we had a family ASL support person as well as her teacher of the deaf. And so we were able to do intensive speech and language work. We did about 3 sessions a week with that, and we did listening and spoken language, so teaching her to learn to listen and listen to learn, and then to also practice, her articulation and actual speech production. And then we paired that with weekly ASL family sessions where our trainer would come into our home and she would teach not only Justin and myself and Emma and our son Quinn, but all of Emma's grandparents, her aunts and uncles, and even our aunts and uncles. So we had about 13 to 15 people every week coming in and learning ASL. We actually are still doing that to this day, although now doing it via Zoom. And we have continued to integrate ASL more and more into our lives. We would also have the ASL instructor go to Emma's daycare at the time twice a month to try to expose the peers of hers to ASL. So that's kind of the decision we made. We are by no means fluent in ASL, and we really did push the listening and spoken language early on because that's primarily the world that she lives in. However, we wanted to keep exposing her more and more as she's gotten older, and hopefully she'll be able to make a choice what language she wants to use as her primary language.
When we had Emma and we knew that this was going to be something that we were going to tackle. We have a fantastic group of close friends, family. I mean, we really do have a village that is behind us and behind our daughter to support that kind of ASL learning process. And it was scary at first, very, scared to think that if you were to ask us at 30 years old, are we going to go and learn a completely new language? We would have been like, you're crazy. But when it's your child, you will do anything, and you'll, climb mountains for them to make sure that they have the resources that they need to succeed and make the choices that's right for them at the right time. So we're getting there. My wife is probably the best in the family for sure. I'm taking second place there.
It's difficult. So we're both kind of perfectionistic, and it's really hard when you want to communicate something and you don't quite know the signs or how to go about that or how to place the words correctly in the sentence. But Melinda has really taught us that it's okay, and it's okay to ask people to slow down, and it's okay to tell them you're new. But it still is a pretty intimidating thing.
As much inclusion as we can get her exposed to, whether it's spoken language and that community or the deaf of hard of hearing community, is we want her to make sure that she feels like she can be included in either environment. And so that's really the driving factor of why we chose the bilingual bimodal approach for our family.
Right after it was confirmed, when she was like 6 or 7 weeks old, when it was confirmed that she was hard of hearing, we decided that we were going to learn ASL and do spoken language. And then we just kept on that path for the last 6 years. We started with baby sign, with just basic things, more, milk, hungry, thirsty, awake, surprise, excited, just emotions and colors. And then once she started to come here to the Baxter, to Mackworth Island preschool, she started learning more ASL structure and the language itself. All the research that we did was basically the younger the child, the easier it is for them to learn a language. And we knew that the only deaf school in the state of Maine was this preschool program. And so we thought this was going to be the best and easiest opportunity for Olive to learn American Sign Language. We researched a lot of opinion pieces written by deaf people and children of deaf adults. The road to learning ASL was and is still a challenge. It's not easy to learn a second language, but American Sign Language is so fun that you want to learn more. So I started out by watching YouTube videos and watching this one family on YouTube who has deaf parents but hearing children, and they sign through their whole YouTube channel and all the videos. And so I would just kind of get comfortable watching it and seeing it that way. And then I did some online courses to learn the basics. But really, it's just been learning with Olive has been the easiest and the funnest. And we use a lot at home. So in our everyday conversation, I took the ASL classes here for the families of the deaf and hard of hearing kids. And Melinda was my teacher, and I did that for the first year. And then once I kind of grew out of that program, I started having one-on-one lessons with Kathy, who's the same person who was teaching Olive. So we were able to just talk for an hour. She would update me on Olive, what Olive was learning, and then I would just try and stay ahead of Olive because she was picking up the language very quickly. Olive is considered bilingual and fluent in ASL and spoken language. But I wouldn't consider myself fluent. I would be fluent if I was also 6 years old. But I would say I'm past beginner. So I'm not quite fluent yet. I would love to be fluent, but I can have a conversation easily enough. And then if I don't understand a word or a sign, then I'll have them finger spell it. But it's exhausting for someone to finger spell an entire conversation. And when I was first learning sign, everybody here who's deaf and communicates primarily with ASL, they did a lot of finger spelling for me, and they were very patient with me. It's actually really easy to add American Sign Language into our day-to-day. Olive wears hearing aids in each ear, and there are many times throughout the day where she can't wear them. If she's taking a bath, if she's sleeping, if she's not feeling well, she typically doesn't want to have them in. And sometimes she just doesn't feel like having them in. And in those situations, we primarily use ASL.
I will be talking about the cued speech system and cued language. Cued speech is a manual system that provides visual access to spoken language. Hand shapes and placements are paired with the mouth shapes of the spoken language. The hand shapes identify consonants, and the placements identify vowels. Cues are used while speaking, but you don't need to use your voice when cueing. Complete access to the language is achieved regardless of hearing levels or use of hearing assistive technology. Cueing makes communication easy in big groups, with background noise, or during tubby time, at the pool, and in the middle of the night. If they don't use hearing aids or implants, you can still provide them access to your home language and activities and to the language of literacy. So, here's an example so you can see how it works. There are many speech sounds that look the same and some you can't even see. The cues make the phonemes distinct and identifiable. Here are 3 different words, but they look exactly alike. The words are mitt, butt, pet. Even when I cue voice off, you can identify the words by the hand shapes and placements of the cues while cueing. Cued speech gives your child access to your home language and culture. If you speak another language at home, you can give them access to that. You are the primary language model. You can give your child access to all the activities and family traditions, and you can use the language that comes naturally to you. Cued language is a bilingual option with another spoken language or cued language, and with ASL. It's also a bilingual bimodal option for kids who don't have auditory access for spoken language. Children who grow up cueing develop literacy skills in the same way as their hearing peers. And for kids who use ASL, you can give them access to English and interactions in cued English so they can learn the language and the skills needed for reading and writing. You can learn to cue in early intervention services, 2-day workshops, online learning, and camps where families like yours can learn together. You, as a parent, will be able to focus on providing your child with a rich language environment. You will be the model for their language and their development as a little human in the community. Cued speech instructors will teach you the system and support your ability to provide accessible language. Cueing speech-language pathologists and teachers of the deaf can support you in being sure that the developmental targets are being met along the way. Getting connected with other parents and families who cue and deaf cueing mentors can help to answer questions you may have along your journey and support you along the way. Communication and access to education may differ for each student. They may be receptive cuers only and speak for themselves. They may use listening and spoken language for direct communication and cued language transliteration for classroom access. Or maybe they use transliteration for part of the day and ASL interpreting for part of the day. There really are a lot of options, and it differs for each student.
I'm the mom of a deaf child. He's 8.5, and he wears cochlear implants. He was born with a mild hearing loss that progressed to severe profound, and got his cochlear implants when he was 4.5. When we first found out in the hospital that he had referred on the newborn hearing screening, we wanted him to speak. That's been our main goal. So we got him hearing aids. He got his first set of hearing aids at 3 months old. And we wanted him to also learn sign language because we knew that he would be a part of the deaf community. So that was something that we started working on with an ASL family trainer, just so that we could learn that. He didn't end up wanting anything to do with sign language, so we ended up using more of the listening and spoken language approach with his hearing loss. When he started kindergarten on a fluke, he ended up with a teacher of the deaf that cues. His teacher of the deaf was sick, so he sat in on a class with a little boy that uses cued speech. And he ended up being a rock star cuer, and it has completely changed his life. It's helped with his reading. He's at the end of 2nd grade, and he's reading on the end of a 3rd grade reading level. Cued speech helps with phonics and things like that, so it's really helped him to thrive at school. And he does use it in school and has a cued speech transliterator in the classroom with him. His teacher uses an RM microphone and speaks through that with him in this classroom. And then his cued speech transliterator is there just to kind of fill in the blanks and anything that needs to be, redone, just to help him along throughout the day. But for the most part, he's using listening and spoken language in school. When he was first, on the playground and stuff like that, when he was 4 or 5, he wouldn't talk to any kids, he wouldn't do anything. And now he's the first one out there saying, come play with me, like, let's play hide and seek, and using his language to be able to communicate with his peers, which is huge, because at one point we weren't sure if that was ever gonna happen. So it's nice to see him out there and speaking. He can speak with anyone, and you wouldn't even know that he did have the deficit at some point and that he's deaf. So he's thriving with it. Raiden does not enjoy wearing his cochlear implants when he wakes up in the morning. Honestly, I can't say that I blame him. If I could kind of do a slow start to the noise and the volume in the morning, I would too. But he wakes up, if it's a school day, he doesn't go too long without them, but on the weekends, he doesn't usually wear them in the morning. So we use sign just to get through the morning, just to kind of make sure he gets dressed and brush your teeth and all that stuff. And we use, once he gets going, sign-supported speech at the house, just to kind of make sure that he's getting the point across. And so that is kind of how we start our day. And then once he has his implants on and he's good to go, we will speak for the most part. And then once he gets to school, he uses the spoken language and cued speech because he has the cued speech transliterator in the classroom. And then right now he is doing baseball. So we're doing the listening and spoken language with that, but his coach is wearing, it's called a mini mic. And so it Bluetooths to his cochlear implants. So his coach's voice can go right to his implants, and that's helping a lot with that. And then at night with bath time, he doesn't wear his implants. So we do sign again. And so he kind of does it all throughout the day. We've had speech therapy through our services, through ECFS and CDS and everything since day one. And then when we started along on the process, we got involved with Maine Hands and Voices. So that's been one of our biggest supports with everything, all of the different language modalities. So no matter what we choose, they've been helpful along the way with that. I know a lot of people, they're like, I can do my research, I can do all this, but definitely use the supports that are offered. They're there to help you. They're there to guide you along the way. This can kind of be like jumping in the deep end when you first get going. So it's fun and easier if you have someone that's already been through it, whether it be another parent or professional that can help you through that.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Seal. I am a deaf individual, born deaf, and my husband is also deaf. And together we have 4 deaf children. When my mother discovered that I was deaf, they provided options for communication. And she could use cued speech English, or she could use American Sign Language, and she was told to just choose one. And that puzzled my mother. And she said, no, we don't want to just choose one. We would like to use both American Sign Language and cued speech. And so I was the first deaf person in Maine to use both languages, both modalities at the same time. And so having that knowledge, and when I had children myself and discovering that they were deaf, I already knew what options were available in terms of communication and modality. And so we utilized a teacher of the deaf, and they often will share information, resources, all of the different modalities. And after considering them all again, we decided to use cued speech and American Sign Language for our children. Now, cued speech, English is my first language, and American Sign Language is my husband's first language. And we wanted to have the exposure of both modalities with our children. And both of us had really learned very well through both modalities. And we felt that our children should use both, knowing that cued speech would give them some access to literacy, to English reading and writing, and they could interact with those who they needed to interact with. Cued speech English is very helpful too for literacy skills, and that was something that really worked well for me in school. Cued speech will show you all the phonemes, all of the different sounds of the English language, such as cat. There's the C, the A, and the T sounds, and in cued speech you can show all of those phonemes. The American Sign Language sign doesn't show all of the sounds, and so it just looks like whiskers if you use the ASL sign for cat. And so that's a good example, just being able to show that difference for my children. Also idioms, that's something that's used within the English language often, such as the idiom, it's raining cats and dogs. If you look out the window, is it really raining true cats and actual dogs? No. So how do you explain that to a child using cued speech and showing that phrase? It helps them to understand that it's really not the cats and dogs that are falling from the sky, but instead it has a different meaning. In an American Sign Language, you can show that in a very visual way. And so I felt like it was important to show both modalities and expose our children to both modalities. American Sign Language is a beautiful language with grammatical features and wonderful classifiers. And with cued speech, we felt that was a wonderful way for our children to access the English language because it's showing in a visual way a sound-based system. And with deaf children who don't have access, who can't hear, that's a very important piece to their learning as well. So being able to have that visual representation and wanting to support our children using both modalities.
Hi, I'm here to talk to you about listening and spoken language, auditory verbal communication opportunities for your child with hearing loss. In a listening and spoken language auditory verbal approach, your child with hearing loss will learn spoken language through a focus on auditory, or listening development. This is a communication opportunity that's often preferred by families who want their child to listen and talk in the language of their home, using the language that parents, family, and friends currently use. Listening and spoken language therapy involves you working with a skilled speech-language pathologist or teacher of the deaf that have training in the methodologies of a listening and spoken language auditory-verbal approach. A cornerstone of listening and spoken language auditory-verbal communication is auditory access. So you might hear your provider say something like eyes open, ears on, or eyes open, listening technology on, because an early goal for your child is to wear their hearing aids, their cochlear implants, or their BAHA device for all waking hours. We know that typically hearing babies learn spoken language by listening to their family and their friends talk. And we know that your baby with hearing loss needs the same opportunity to hear you talk, sing, read, play all day, every day. And they do this by wearing their listening technology, which allows the sounds of your speech and language to reach their brain. Through guidance from your listening and spoken language auditory verbal provider or a speech-language pathologist specially trained in auditory verbal approaches, you will learn to focus on your child's auditory development. We don't often think about it, but understanding and using spoken language happens in the brain. This strong focus on listening technology use and on developing auditory skills helps to grow strong, robust auditory connections in the brain that your child will later use for talking, for reading, and for learning. Because of this emphasis on auditory development, sign language is not used in this approach. Similarly, although natural gestures and lip reading are used by the family and child, they're not taught or emphasized in your therapy sessions. However, most children who grow up in an auditory verbal approach are strong lip readers because they learn to maximize the auditory information that supplements lip reading cues. You might be wondering how you learn these auditory strategies. Well, you'll be working in your home or via remote connection with a skilled provider in your home who will help you learn ways to strengthen your child's auditory brain development for optimal spoken language, reading, and writing outcomes. And this will happen during your ordinary everyday activities. And your consistent use of spoken language in conversations with your child will provide opportunities for them to hear and process spoken language. Now, in your therapy sessions, along with skills targeted for your child's development, you will learn teaching strategies. You will learn why the strategy can help your child learn spoken language. You will learn how to apply the strategy during activities such as dressing, mealtime, playtimes, bathing, things that you do daily already. And you will learn how to observe if your child is learning the targeted skills by understanding the sounds and the language that you're using. Activities and information from your sessions may be augmented by online learning opportunities, handouts, or even iPad apps. Now, what other things do you need to do? Well, because in listening and spoken language, auditory verbal approach involves auditory access, your visits with your audiologist are very important. Strong outcomes require well-fit and well-maintained hearing aids, BAHA, or cochlear implants, whatever your child is using. Your listening and spoken language provider will teach you how to check your child's listening equipment and to make sure that the child's listening equipment is working for them on any given day. Ultimately, your job will be to talk, to sing, to read, to play, and to love your child using a fabulous tool, your voice, and the language that you already know so well. Many families feel that spending time with a deaf or hard of hearing mentor that communicates using spoken language is beneficial. Families also find that family-to-family support from others who have gone through this process is helpful. It can be comforting and it can be encouraging. When you choose a listening and spoken auditory verbal option and your child goes to school, your child will communicate with friends, family, teachers, and others they may meet through listening, understanding spoken language, and using spoken language. In school, they'll have their typical assistive hearing technology along with other remote microphone technology to help them fully access their education and social experiences. We have a son who's 8, and then our daughter just turned 6, and she was born deaf. She's profoundly deaf due to congenital CMV, and she uses bilateral cochlear implants to hear.
We don't have any history of hearing loss in the family, so it was a shock to learn initially, and we didn't have experience to build off of. And so I think when you're talking about our journey, we just kind of did it step by step and sort of relied on others that had more experience than us, and we tried to make decisions for our daughter based on our family and what we thought the best opportunities were for her, and so far I think if we had known where we'd be now when we had found out, I think that would have relieved a lot of the initial stress, because our daughter is doing really well, and I think all the things that we were concerned about in terms of us being able to communicate with her, we are able to do really well, and hope to continue to do so, and I think have set ourselves and her up to continue along the journey the way that we had hoped it would go.
She got hearing aids when she was 3 months old, and we pretty much immediately started working with a listening and spoken language specialist who is certified in auditory verbal therapy. And she came to our house once a week, every week, and we started working with her when our daughter had hearing aids, and then when it became clear that the hearing aids weren't allowing her enough access to sound and to access speech, we made the decision for her to get cochlear implants. And once they were activated, all along we kept working with this specialist, and after her implants were activated, we kept that up on a weekly basis. By the time she turned 3, she no longer qualified for any services. Her speech and language was on the level, she was on the same level as her typically hearing peers. Her speech and language is incredible, and now she's in kindergarten and she's an early reader, and honestly she's reading probably at a 2nd grade level. So she's doing incredibly well. Better truly than I think we ever would have imagined and could have hoped and dreamed for. A lot of the things that we read and heard and were told would be hard for her and challenging for her, a lot of those things she's proven everybody wrong. Her ability to take in sound and stories and music and speech and remember it and then reproduce it is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
We had home visits early on, and all the different communication options were explained to us, and I think that we listened to experts and read books, and I can remember watching videos of other kids who had worked with listening and spoken language providers, and seeing the outcomes that were possible. Seeing these kids who had incredible speech and sounded just like any other kid, honestly brought us a lot of hope and made us feel like this might be possible for Jane. So I think those were influences, and just thinking about our family and our lifestyle and the goals that we have for her and our hopes and dreams for her. Honestly, it seemed like the path that we chose for her, that listening and spoken language and auditory verbal therapy specifically would give her the best chance of having that outcome.
I think for us it was a combination of really being able to communicate with our daughter in a way that technology has allowed at this point. And I think it was to, again, provide the opportunities that we saw in Jane's future, again, making decisions for her when she can't make them for herself. I think that was something we struggled with. Are we making the right decisions? We didn't know, we don't know, but I think it was with the intention of being able to communicate with our child and really kind of wanting the same things for her that we wanted for our son Henry, who is hearing.
It's really a lifestyle. It was, making sure that she's wearing her technology, whether it was her hearing aids as a baby or once she got cochlear implants, that if the saying was, eyes open, ears on. So when her eyes were open, her technology went on. And all of our daily routines, it was just all wrapped up in it. So I became a narrator. I just constantly narrated all parts of our day. We're going down the stairs. We're going up the stairs. I see a ball. I see a blue ball. Literally to the point where I was tired of hearing myself talk. It's not that you put the technology on and then they just magically, everything's fine. No, not at all. It is a commitment. It's a true commitment, and a true commitment to a lifestyle where you are absolutely bombarding your child with language all day and filling their world with as much information about the sounds that they're hearing. It just felt like such a wonderful back and forth, and just something that she was so happy and enjoying. So that made us feel like this is all worth it. We're doing the right thing. Look at how she's just thriving. And then quickly it became her speaking, and then she just doesn't talk. She doesn't stop talking. So, there are literally moments where it would just be so, so much like singing or yelling or something, and we would stop and look at each other and say, we worked really hard to make this happen.
I have 5 children. My 4th child is significantly deaf. And so I was in my mid-20s when Deanna was born. She was that last year before they started the newborn hearing test. So I would not know that she was hearing impaired till she was 3. Fast forward, 26 years later, 24 years later, then she had my granddaughter Grace, who I am helping raise, is significantly deaf also. She is thriving, and thankfully, because we found out when she was born right at the hospital, we knew that then and there. She's only turned 2 yesterday, so she has a tendency still to go, and she'll go, so I know she wants something to eat. But we're trying to get her to say, if I was to say, are you hungry? For her to tell me yes, instead of doing, we're trying to transition her out back into now the verbal part of it. But she's starting to finally put little sentences together. So it's coming. Her mother was the influence because we went with the spoken language and the hearing aids. Grace, when she gets up, she's ready to go. She's active. The first thing we try to do is put her hearing aids in because she actually welcomes it. Because I think she understands there's a difference in what she's hearing without them to what she has with them. So she's never, surprisingly, given me a problem. She, from 8 months on, has never, sits right there and lets me put them in. I think with all of this early intervention, I see a huge difference in her compared to, again, I do comparison to her mother, than where her mother was at that age. She's just, I find that she's just taken off and bloomed so much more than her mother did, at this early stage. They have classified her as between the moderate to severe. They explained to me the certain sounds that she can hear, so we really pay attention, making sure hearing aids are in so that she can hear. Loud noises, if you're talking loud, just like her mom, without them, she can hear, but you can't talk like this or have something low because then she can't hear you. So we've just learned, again, it's that adapting to her.
The auditory oral approach is one path to developing listening and spoken language. The goal of the auditory oral approach is to use listening, as well as speech reading and natural gestures, to access spoken language. Although visual cues are used, strengthening listening abilities remains an essential part of this approach. Listening skills are worked on naturally in the child's environment throughout their day. That being said, this approach is highly dependent upon your child consistently using hearing assistive technology, such as hearing aids, bone-anchored hearing aids, or cochlear implants, so that they have the best possible auditory access to spoken language. Families must be committed to attending ongoing audiological appointments and make sure that their hearing assistive technology is working as expected with daily listening checks and technology inspections. In this approach, parents are encouraged to be face-to-face during interactions, and items in the environment may be used to support comprehension of spoken language. Children may be prompted to look as well as listen during activities to best enhance access to spoken language throughout their day. Some families using an auditory oral approach also use some sign support to provide more visual context for spoken language messages. Families typically choose this approach when their goal is for their child to use their home language and are committed to management and full-time use of hearing assistive technology. Families choosing this approach typically feel their children benefit from visual supports such as gestures or speech reading for comprehension. They ultimately want their child to access their education through listening and spoken language, given some visual supports and advocacy training. Families can learn strategies to support this approach through oral teachers of the deaf, speech-language pathologists who have experience working with deaf and hard of hearing children, and/or listening and spoken language specialists. There are a variety of online resources and apps that can further strengthen understanding and use of strategies and techniques used with an auditory oral approach. Many families find resources and invaluable support through connections with other families and deaf and hard of hearing adults.
Avery's our only child, and she was born deaf, hard of hearing. We found out on day 3 in the hospital that she failed her newborn hearing screening. And we originally had a ton of tests after that, and they told us it was hereditary. However, we have no family members that have been diagnosed deaf, hard of hearing. And by the time she was 3 months old, she was aided. And I really do feel that was an important step in her journey, because she was aided at exactly the 3-month mark where you start to develop communication and speech. And at 3 months old, that's when you really start to focus on learning language. And she had her hearing aids on so young that it really helped her progress. By the time she was 18 months old, she lost more hearing. And that's when we found out that she had a progressive loss, meaning that eventually, possibly down the road, she could go deaf. So she lost hearing at 18 months old, and then she lost more hearing again at 4 years old. So at 4 years old, we had decided, okay, we've been verbal communicators from day one. It's what we chose in the beginning because she only had a mild hearing loss, and we didn't realize it was a progressive loss. So at 4 years old, we decided, since it is a progressive loss, we need to add another modality to our language. And we chose cued speech because after meeting people, other parents, and talking with her teacher for the deaf, what my main concern was learning to read, spelling. It's really hard to learn to read when you don't hear all the sounds. Cued speech is a different way to sign out the sounds of words. So we started with that. Avery is now 7 years old, in 2nd grade, and is one of the top readers in her class, which is pretty amazing considering if anyone sat in on her audiologist tests and really saw what she can't hear, it's really amazing how much she has grown through the years. She's an amazing lip reader because of cued speech. And it has really benefited her, and that's what we decided to do. We don't use cued speech like when we're talking throughout the day. We've decided we use it when she needs it. So I'll use it when we're reading books at night and she's trying to sound out words, or when we're doing spelling words and there's sometimes some of the words on your lips make the same movement, like vote and boat. It's very similar, it's very much the same. And if you don't have the vocabulary behind it, it can be hard to learn to spell a word that sounds exactly the same. So I'll cue out some of those sounds and then she picks it up and she's done phenomenal. That's why we chose cued speech. But the majority of it, she's a verbal communicator. We are all verbal communicators. That's what she uses at school, and so that's what we've done. So we did a weekend getaway at the Pine Tree Camp where they did a cued speech presentation, and they also went over other modalities, speech modalities while we were there. And I got together with Nicole Dobson, who we started talking, and I'm like, I really want to introduce this into her life. I'm very nervous about when she learns to read, and I want to give her a tool to succeed. And it has been a tool for us to succeed. So I got together with Nicole, and we now do cued speech with Nicole every other week for an hour and a half. That's what works for our family. So every other week we get together with Nicole and we do an hour and a half of cued speech, and we go over we do kind of like a pre-teaching for Avery. So the teacher will give her teacher for the deaf and her cued speech stuff that they're going to go over a week in advance. So Avery gets to view it ahead of the other students ahead of time. So it gives her that background in advance, so that way when she's lip reading, she has an idea of what they're going to speak about, and it has helped. She's an A+ student. She's done very well. Avery misses out on 50% of everything that's being said, and your brain will automatically fill stuff in if you have a background and some kind of a knowledge ahead of time. So for her, it's helped because it's filling in those gaps for her. I learned cued speech. I'm not that great at it, yep. but we I use it for her when we're reading at night. So there'll be words that she's struggling to sound out, and I'll help her with the cueing. I went to St. Dom's, and I wanted my child to go to St. Dom's. And that was a really hard decision to go private versus public, because if you go public, you get so many more services than if you go private. And we just decided she was excelling. She was doing so good. And I said, why are we not going for this? Let's just do it and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, well, we change schools. St. Dom's has been amazing. They work with me. They'll do whatever I want. So it's worked for us. And the smaller classroom sizes have really benefited her. And I'm so glad I trusted my gut and went with St. Dom's. So at 4 years old, when she lost more hearing, we know it's going to come eventually someday. So at that point, we decided to go to Boston Children's Hospital and go meet with their deaf and hard of hearing unit. And we met with Dr. Kane. She's amazing. And we did all the tests. We spent an entire day there going over all the tests. And they determined that Avery wouldn't be a great candidate. She'd be the best candidate for a cochlear implant. So her speech is so strong already that if she did go deaf and we had to get a cochlear implant, that it would work fine for her.
My husband Mike and I have two girls. Sophie's 4 years old and Grace is 1.5. Sophie was born with bilateral severe hearing loss. So Sophie first got her cochlear implants when she was 12 months old, activated at 13 months. And it was a pretty exciting day. We first got to see her react to some noises, and so it was an emotional moment for us. But it was definitely a slow curve from there. Little things would happen. We'd see her start to react to her own name, and that was very exciting. Her first word was hi, and then she'd say it all the time, hi, hi, hi. And then from there, she kind of took off. So just kept learning more words. That's when we got her into speech therapy. So she's had speech therapy since she was 2. She's still getting it now at preschool. She's pretty much at the same level as her peers, an average level. So we're happy with the progress she's made. So when we got Sophie's diagnosis that she had severe hearing loss, we were pretty blindsided. We really knew nothing about hearing loss. We'd never really been exposed to people with hearing loss in our everyday lives, and we didn't really know what our options were. So it's always been a goal for us, for Sophie to be able to communicate in spoken language. But we didn't know what that would look like, if that was something that would be attainable with her level of hearing loss. So we had to do a lot of research, we had a lot of support, and ultimately we decided to get her hearing technology. She's had hearing technology since she was 3 months old. She started with hearing aids and then cochlear implants. And that's really just what was best for our family, and it's what worked for us. She's thrived. She loves to talk, she loves to sing, she loves to dance. And she, from a young age, she's been in preschool. She's had support in the preschool from speech pathologists, from teacher of the deaf. She's now at the Mackworth Island preschool. So she's really thrived. I honestly couldn't imagine it any other way. We sometimes forget that she has hearing loss. Yeah, I mean, we did some sign when she was younger. They call them baby signs. And we did that until she had her implants and she was activated. And then we really focused on spoken language and speech therapy. But I think it's important to remember that you're not locked into a communication method, and it's pretty fluid. As she's gotten older and she's been at the preschool, she's been exposed to more kids with different hearing loss and different ways of communicating. She's picked up a lot of ASL. She's pretty into it. She comes home and she signs her name. She's very excited. So, I mean, I would love for her to continue to grow and learn more ASL. But our main focus is spoken language and getting that as good as we can before she goes to kindergarten. We were very supportive from day one, the day we got the diagnosis. We've had support from teacher of the deaf, other parents. We were connected to other families who had hearing technology and have kind of been there, done that. We were able to learn from them. So that was a good resource for us. We were connected with a speech pathologist at a pretty young age who really helped us with strategies to be able to get her to use as much language as possible, as well as her audiologist, who made sure she had the right resources in the classroom, the right technology. So I've had a lot of support.
yellow duck, what do you see? I see a blue horse looking at me. Blue horse, what do you see? I see a green frog looking at me.
Green frog, what do you see? I see a purple cat looking at me.
Purple cat, what do you see? I see a white dog looking at me. White dog, what do you see? I see a black sheep looking at me.
Black sheep, what do you see? I see a goldfish looking at me. Goldfish, what do you see? I see a teacher looking at me.
Listen. Teacher, what do you see? I see children looking at me. Children, what do you see? We see animals looking at us.
Don't panic. It is a big deal. It's a huge deal. And you're probably gonna lose a ton of sleep, and you're gonna stress, and you're gonna worry, but you would have anyway, hearing or deaf. But at the end of the day, it's really not a big deal. They'll still be happy and funny, and they'll still learn, and they're still gonna grow. It's just getting your mind used to them growing and learning in a different way than you had planned. Plans changed, and that's it. And no matter which road you choose or which path you take, everything really will be okay. As long as you give your child love and attention, that's all they need.
My best advice would be to remember that it's a very fluid process. You're always going to learn more. You're always going to see different approaches. I think you just have to do what's best for your family. Do what you think is best for your child. Don't worry about any sort of judgment. You're gonna be supported. It's a pretty good community that we have here, people with hearing loss, and you're gonna be supported.
Whatever works for your family, you just go with it. And this is what's worked for us, and this is what's helped her succeed. I'm not afraid to change it if something happens. And we did have to change it. We went from 100% verbal communicators to also adding in cued speech when needed. If we get to the point that we have to change it again, we will.
It's a new world when you find out that your kid's deaf.
Well, anything, like any disability or anything, it's scary. But I mean, it's language. It's not something that it's not something that they're missing.
Yeah.
Technically, like they're missing their hearing, but their hearing's through their eyes. So I mean, the biggest thing that they told us was, especially from picking what to do, like from hearing aid, cochlear, or ASL, your child will be different than anyone else.
Don't be overwhelmed at first, which is really easy to do. Just understand that there are a lot of people there to help you and that you can make the process fun.
Making it fun is key to learning sign language, we think.
I think for other families that are trying to determine what's best for them, it makes sense to go with what you're naturally doing or find the resources to to give you those options and to find the way that best fits into your daily life so that it doesn't seem like extra. I think there's a way to make it work for your family that it can fit into place as it already belonged. I think there's days that it'll change, but I think long term we're sticking with kind of the same thing, but we really let our child, Lucas, drive that approach.
It's okay to not know which one is the best for your family and what route to go down. Sometimes you go down the path of, we're going to try learning sign language, and if that doesn't work, it's okay. It's okay to change your paths and kind of figure out what's going to work best for not just your child, but for the family. If we felt that Haley needed more support, we were open to it. Being open to all of the options that are out there and trying to explore those options are also really key.
Listening to your kids is huge. As parents, we kind of get set in our ways. Like when I started, I'm like, you're gonna speak, you're gonna sign. Cued speech was not even close to being in the realm of anything I thought that he would do. And he started doing it and spoke up and was like, this is working for me. And if I wouldn't have taken a step back and listened to him and been like, okay, let's talk about this, he wouldn't be where he is right now. So it's important to listen to your kid, and if they want something, stop and talk about it. And maybe you don't have to say yes, maybe it's not the right thing, but being open to the different options for your child is really important.
Everybody's journey is going to be unique. What makes sense for one family may not make sense for another family. So I think really sort of think about what's most important to you and how to achieve that.
Make it fun, ask questions, accept help when it's offered to you, learn about deaf culture, and I think most importantly, just be your child's advocate. The most well-intentioned person still isn't going to know what's best for your child and your family. So be your child's voice and be their advocate.
Just make them strong. Make them strong and let them know that if you're not there as their advocate, they got to be their own advocate. And my daughter has no problem saying anything to anybody. She has no problem telling people, I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. Could you speak up? I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Could you repeat that? She has no problem with that. Because I told her from a young age, you are only going to hurt yourself if you don't speak up.
Not set limits or assume that something's not possible. To stick with the highest hopes and dreams you have for your child and do everything you can to believe that it's possible.
Any advice to everybody, do what's best for your family.
And always ask questions. We never stop asking. Avery got her hearing aids at 3 months old. And so we would be out in public and strangers, people come up to you and they say things and they ask questions. And I figured out early on that how I approach this, your first instinct is to be like, what? How dare you come up to me? But I figured out early on that how I approach this and how I answer people is how she is going to perceive her challenges. And so I always handle it very positive. I always speak about it positively. I always take it as a form of it's my chance to educate people on deaf and hard of hearing children. You want your child to be comfortable in their deafness and confident with it. And so we just recommend getting as many opinions as possible and making sure it's a combination of hearing people and deaf people, just to make sure you're covering all the bases.
Oh, definitely. I really was fortunate to call upon my experiences as a deaf child, working as a teacher of the deaf myself, and it really helped for me to know all of the different options. And I do know that what works for your child is what makes the right choice. And it doesn't matter what you choose, it's just important that it's a good choice for your child.